Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Chit Chat with Cass. I hope you have all enjoyed this month of podcasts with all of the Halloween type themes, if you will. This last episode for October is super fun and special as I'm having some guest speakers on today's episode. I had a lot of fun the last time I featured some guest speakers on a Star Wars podcast, and I really wanted to hear some other thoughts and opinions for today's topic. So today I will be talking all about movie villains, or more specifically, horror movie villains. Now I do apologize, I'm not sure if the microphone will pick it up, but we are having a lovely rainstorm this evening, so hopefully it will just add to the spooky vibe of horror movie villains. But just in case you happen to hear that pick back up, that's what's going on. So, villains. They can come in many different shapes and sizes, especially for the horror or scary movie genre. In some cases, they could be a real killer or like a real life person in like perhaps a slasher film or something of that nature. Or you have like the supernatural being side of things, a creature or a person that is the villain of it, but with a supernatural twist. Each villain is very different. Like, do you even see the villain? Or is it hidden away for that further creepy vibe, if you will? That really just depends on what movie you're watching. How is this villain portrayed? Does music perhaps help? Does the score add chills to the already creepy villain in this horror movie? Or is it all about those scary angles or specific filming? Well, that's going to depend on the director, of course. Or does the villain need like the blood and gore or the shock factor to scare the audience? So many different types of horror villains, so many different ways that you can film a horror villain or bring it to the big screen, if you will. Some villains may be similar in like the slasher category or the supernatural category, but still, each villain is different in their own way, whether that is in the script or in the behind the scenes of creating that movie. And of course, everyone has their go-to villain, their favorite or their one they think is the best of them all, as we'll find out a little bit later in this episode. So, of course, there's a lot of factors that can go into making a good villain. As I said, that could be like the behind the scenes of the writing, the producing, the directing, the makeup department even, and so on. Or even from the audience perspective. And that's going to vary with who exactly is watching that specific scary movie. Sometimes a villain can make the whole movie. Or other times, if the villain is lacking, maybe the movie won't do as well. So for this specific podcast, I did some looking online, and I went through a bunch of online lists and favorites. I have a list here of some of the top horror movie villains according to the online people. I kind of merged a few different lists to get the majority of what I was seeing in like these top favorite movie lists. I think I have about 20 top horror villains here on this list, just compiled from various sources. There are, of course, so many other horror villains out there. The world of scary movies is pretty large, so I can't cover every single horror villain, but hopefully I will cover some of the most popular ones. So just a warning here, I'm sure there will be some sort of spoilers in this episode of the general horror movie topics, if you will. I'm not sure how deep we'll go, but just a fair warning, there's probably going to be some spoilers about horror movies throughout this episode. So let's go down this list of horror villains. First up, we have Jigsaw from the Saw franchise, and that started in 2004. So I have only seen a few of these movies. I'm not a hardcore Saw fan. I'm honestly not even sure how many there are, to be honest. I've probably seen like 3 or 4 of them. I'm not entirely sure. But Jigsaw is definitely creepy. Whether you do the figure face of the character, all scary looking, right? Or the mastermind behind all of it. Some of the most screwed up stuff I've seen for sure has come from these Saw movies. It definitely made me cringe a lot while I was watching it, which I guess is one of the potential effects of a good scary movie or a good scary villain if you cringe while watching the movie. So in turn, I'd say that that makes him a pretty good villain because of the shock factor. Saw definitely has this. Jigsaw definitely brings the different shock factors to the audience while you're watching these films. So you have the scary factor, obviously, the crazy or good storyline, depending on how you look at it. It's definitely got some crazy twists. And I think that makes him altogether a pretty good scary villain, especially a more modern scary villain. Then we have Samara from The Ring, and that started in 2002. Now, I really enjoyed the Ring movies. I have only seen the American versions of these, so just keep that in mind. You do have the Japanese versions as well. But I really like the Ring movies, and Samara is a really interesting villain. I'm always going to be a fan of backstories, especially in horror films, and I do enjoy Samara's backstory, along with the story of the tape. You know, what is Samara all about? Why does she do this? It all ties together on why she does what she does, or how the victims play into her specific story, or the tape, or her surroundings, all of it. And Samara is definitely creepy. Like, you do get some scary vibes with her, or even some potential, like, jump scares with Samara in these Ring movies. So you definitely have scary checked off for this specific character. As I said, I do enjoy her villain story, so that is a plus for me as well. So all in all, I would say that she does make a great villain. Especially when you take, like, more of a ghost villain, you could say, and you tie it in with, like, technology, like the tape, and then later on it kind of moves into further technology. Like, pairing a ghost story with something like watching a movie or watching a tape really works for me. I just really enjoy Samara. Next up, we have Freddy Krueger from Nightmare on Elm Street. This started in 1984. So Freddy is often looped in with a lot of the top horror movie villains. Although I've always thought he was quite different in tone, in his villainous ways, you could say. I don't know how to put it, but he's very adult. Does that make sense? I mean, he's very geared to more mature language, you know. I mean, he's calling people bitches all the time, you know, all that jazz. So I've always gotten a different vibe from Freddy Krueger than some of the other top horror villains, you could say. Now, I do enjoy Freddy Krueger, and he is definitely one of those villains you love to hate. Robert Englund made his character famous and what he is today, basically. So you have to give him props for bringing that character to life. It's not like some of these villains where it's simply someone in a mask and perhaps multiple people could play this character. Freddy was really based around Robert Englund's performance. And then, of course, Freddy was recast in the 2010 remake of Nightmare on Elm Street. He was played by Jackie Earle Haley in that. And he gave, once again, a very creepy, scary performance, you could say, but perhaps not the dark, comical version that Robert Englund did in the 80s. So, and also with the 80s version Freddy, we had makeup that was very different compared to the remake as well. While you have the classic Freddy look in the 80s film and its sequels, the remake had him appear more like a realistic burn victim, which was a very different take and a nice updated version of Freddy Krueger. Freddy's backstory is great in this. Now, what he did isn't great because he's a sick creep that attacked children. But the storyline is great. The idea of the parents going after him and killing him because of what he had done, and then in turn he goes after the teens in that town. It's a good backstory for sure. Now, is Freddy scary? He's for sure creepy in some of the parts, especially with, you know, some of the language or some of the lines he has. But with a dark comedy spin on it for sure, because some of the lines are definitely more like comedic compared to flat out scary. It's not overly terrifying to me, but that's not to say that if I started dreaming of Freddy Krueger and he was trying to kill me in my sleep, that would be horrific because I really enjoy sleep. I enjoy dreaming, so trying to avoid sleep and dreams would be like a no-go for me and I'd probably die right away. But Freddy Krueger should definitely be on this list of best villains. Next up, we have Michael Myers from Halloween. That started in 1978. Michael is another one that is always in the top list of horror movie villains. Now, before I dive into this character, I do want to say that I have not seen the new Halloween. I know. I hope to see it in the coming days. Like, wish me luck. I'm dying to see this new movie, but keep that in mind. So, Michael Myers is just one of the top creepy villains to me. No matter the version, really, he is just always creepy. It doesn't have to be a brutal kill or jump scare for Michael Myers to be terrifying, in my opinion. The slow movements or the suddenly behind you moments, Michael Myers is scary, okay? And the mask adds to it as well. You know, what was once a Captain Kirk mask is freaking terrifying these days. Especially with some of the lighting on the mask, it's creepy. You know, the mask started like kind of scary looking in the first one, and it's just gotten scarier and scarier as time has gone on. Backstory for him is conflicting depending on what like version or story you're watching, really, or what sequel you could say. I'm not sure what it is or how it's referenced in the new film, but you know, the basic gist of, you know, him becoming a murderer as a child, being institutionalized, and then getting out. So I also prefer the original, like, Michael Myers, you could say, compared to, say, the Rob Zombie stuff. Like, that just wasn't for me, really. I didn't like the direction that those Halloween movies or that Michael Myers went, but that's just my opinion. I know a lot of people like those movies. I'll personally stick with the original. But the first Halloween and H2O are probably some of my favorites. We will see where this new one ranks once I finally get to see it. But no matter, I still classify Michael Myers as a great scary movie villain. So next up, we are jumping to Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th, and that started in 1980. So Jason, he is also very popular in the scary movie villain category of characters. But honestly, not really for me, guys. I don't know why, but I've never really been a huge Jason fan. Or maybe it's that the Friday the 13th movies just don't do it for me. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the idea of his mother being the big bad in the first one is a fantastic twist, but I also think the first Friday the 13th movie is not good. Like, the first time I saw it, it didn't catch me. I don't really have any need to see it again. I'm just not a fan. Same can be said for a lot of the Friday the 13th movies. Like, honestly, if you guys are a fan and you have a favorite in this series, please comment and let me know. Like, tell me which one I should watch, because the ones that I've tried to watch, I don't care for. I do, however, enjoy the remake that came out in 2009. I actually thought that that was a decent, scary movie, and it was one of the first times that I'd actually enjoyed a Friday the 13th movie, of course. I think it's a pretty good slasher film. Oh, and I've also seen Freddy vs. Jason, which is, you know, it's comical and pretty creepy as well, but a lot of comedy in that too. So maybe I just haven't seen the right Friday the 13th movie to get into the story. I also don't understand why it's called Friday the 13th. I mean, is the day ever referenced? Is it? Or did they just use the day just because? Because I really feel like this should have been called, like, Crystal Lake. Now, while I'm not a huge fan of this series, I have to admit that Jason is terrifying. He is always massive and huge. Like, I don't know who they have playing Jason in these movies, but he's huge. I would be so scared if I saw him running through the woods at me. Like, no freaking way. No thank you. His backstory is, like, so sad, and, like, you know, the drowning in the lake while he was at camp. So I do enjoy that aspect of the character, his backstory. I think it does have potential. But the lack of a favorite film in the series for me is what ruins it. It doesn't make Jason a top favorite of mine, but I do understand why people include him on this list, because I think he's a good villain. I just really want to see a good Friday the 13th movie. And if you do have a favorite, be sure to let me know which one I should watch. So next we have Jack Torrance from The Shining, and that movie came out in 1980. So The Shining is an interesting movie when you're looking at Jack Torrance, because it is such a popular film and a lot of Stanley Kubrick fans really enjoy this movie. He has quite the following. But this version of Jack Torrance is actually quite different from the Stephen King book version. If you actually really want to see a Jack Torrance that is closer to the book, you should check out the 97 TV miniseries. It's much closer. But The Kubrick version is pretty creepy and scary, and it gets wildly crazy as the movie goes on. I want to say that the main difference is Jack Nicholson doesn't make a big enough change in the character. So I'm a Jack Nicholson fan, so this isn't like trashing on Jack Nicholson at all. But at the beginning, he's already a little crazy or creepy at the start of the film, as that is with a lot of Jack Nicholson characters. You know, at the start of the film, you can kind of see like, you know, a Joker type character at the start of that, if you will. So when you compare it to the book or the miniseries, you see a much bigger shift in the character from a loving father to a crazed psycho. So I know that that's a lot of people's problems with this movie when they are critical of it or compare it to the book, because Jack Torrance is the main character and there's not a big enough shift between the start of the movie and the end. Yes, he goes completely crazy, but it's even more drastic in the book. But no matter the book comparison, everyone adds Jack Torrance to their list, okay? Here's Johnny, like such a popular line in horror movie history. And there's also a lot of other horror movie references in this movie that people reference for the genre, like red rum, or come play with us, Danny. Like, there's a lot of things in this movie that are so popular in the horror movie genre. And people still question and debate this movie today because there's so many different like twists and turns with it. So, is Jack Torrance a good villain? I would say for sure he is creepy, and he goes crazy creepy for sure. And I understand why he is a fan favorite. Not just from Kubrick fans, but just in general. If you take the book away and just look at the movie, he is a good horror movie villain. Next up, we have Pennywise from It. That first came out in 1990. The creepy clowns. Tim Curry scared the shit out of me when I was younger, and he made me steer clear of all things clowns for a very long time. So I mentioned this came out in 1990, the miniseries did, because it was so popular for a while, and Tim Curry is amazing as Pennywise. A lot of people reference the miniseries, although they have made the remake to this story and of Pennywise in 2017, I believe. This new one is played by Bill Skarsgård, and both of the Pennywises are scary and creepy, okay? But they are also very different from each other. A lot of us grew up with Tim Curry's version of Pennywise, and it was very interesting to see a different take on this scary clown. I don't think either one is better. I think Bill Skarsgård did a fantastic job with Pennywise, especially when, you know, he was going up against Tim Curry. Tim Curry is amazing. But I do enjoy both performances and both versions of this scary clown. I do look forward to the second part of this remake where the characters are going to be adults. I would say that the history and talk of the town, you know, of Derry, is what helps make Pennywise so creepy. Like, clowns are already creepy to me, alright? And then you have, like, the history creepiness of the town makes it even creepier. And, you know, it's a Stephen King book. And he helped make clowns the creepy icons that they are today with this book, then miniseries, and now it's into a movie. That paired with the performances, I feel like make Pennywise a fantastic horror movie villain. Alright, next up we have Candyman from 1992. So, Tony Todd makes a fantastic villain. He's one of those people that has like a super cool voice, and it can so easily go creepy if he wants it to. And that's what he does for the Candyman role. So these movies for sure scared me as a kid, and even today they are super creepy. But I will admit I need to rewatch them. I have the series and I just need to binge it so I can watch it again. But especially since I hear they are going to try and remake it, like they do with everything these days. But villains-wise, he's a good one. The villain plays off the urban legend, kind of like Bloody Mary tales, and creates something a little different. His backstory, or what happened to him, is very dark and it's tragic, and that makes for a very dark and tragic present as he claims his victims, you could say. I remember my friends and I watched these movies when we were kids, and a few days later we went to a park and we had to go to the bathroom, and we were both so terrified to go inside because it was a dark and creepy bathroom, and we were waiting for Candyman to appear. He scared us. So I definitely think that makes a good villain for sure. And, that big hook he's got on his hand definitely helps to terrify people. Then we have Pinhead from Hellraiser, 1987. I felt the need to mention this one because it showed up on many of the top lists, but here's the thing. I don't know anything about him, guys. I've never seen a Hellraiser movie, not even a single clip. So I have no idea if he's a good villain. According to the internet, he is, but I haven't seen any of it. I don't know his backstory. I don't know anything about him. So you guys can let me know, should I take the time and watch the Hellraiser movie? Yes, no, maybe so. I don't know if he's a good villain. Then we have Count Dracula from Dracula, 1931. So I was surprised to see this come up so much, but it was on several different lists that I was reading over. This is definitely a classic monster, a classic movie villain, right? This goes along with those other classic monster characters, the black and white, beautifully made, all that jazz. So it makes sense that Bela Lugosi's Dracula would be on many horror lists. Of course, it is not a modern horror film at all, or a full-on scary movie when you compare it to films today, but for the time, this is the 30s we're talking about. This was a horror movie, for sure. And in this, you get the first Dracula film, is that correct? Correct me if I'm wrong, but he did set the tone and introduction for many more Draculas to come, and various vampires films in the world, right? So while he may not be super scary as some of them on this list, he did help move horror genre forward, so I think he has the right to be on this villains list. Next up, we have Norman Bates from Psycho, 1960. Eek, 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 eek. So this movie as a whole, I feel like changed horror movies forever. Alfred Hitchcock's definitely pushed things for the time with Psycho, and Norman Bates is a very interesting and smart villain. Not just because of his actions or what he does in the movie, but how he is portrayed. He's shown as kind of a kind and nice guy in this movie, and you are led to believe that his mother is a crazed killer and that she's behind the famous shower scene and so on. When the big reveal of him dressed as his mother, the viewer is like, what the fuck? Wait, he's insane? He's crazy? He's a psycho. He's the true villain. And I think that makes him a smart villain from the director's point of view. It shocks the viewers. I mean, he's almost kind of like a likable guy in the beginning, right? Just like this regular nice guy that's checking her into the hotel, maybe a little overly friendly, but not the villain, right? And then, bam, he is. The scene with the camera zooming in on him at the end of this film with the crazy Norman Bates smile, there is your creepy, regular human horror movie villain right there. No supernatural powers, he's just a regular guy, and he is scary. I mean, this movie's directing is on point for horror, even today. The lighting and the black and white, I kind of fangirl over lighting and black and white things, so maybe it's just me. But when I rewatch this movie, it's just such a good horror movie. And of course, the movie score adds even more to Psycho vibe. You have that eek eek score and some of the other bits that just really pull all the scenes together. But you do really have to give it to Anthony Perkins. He does a really good job in the role of Norman Bates. Next up, we have the shark from Jaws, 1975. So I found this villain very interesting. Interesting that it was on this list. Actually, several lists, right? But, I mean, I guess it is a villain in this thriller movie in Jaws, isn't it? I don't know why, but the shark never scared me when I was a kid, even though I had some massive fears over water. I don't know why, but the shark never scared me. I'm just weird. So I have seen all of the Jaws movies a million times. I think for a lot of people, the shark is scary because it's something that could happen much easier in real life. While, sharks don't usually kill quite like this, it's more of a natural occurrence, you could say, than it would be compared to Freddy or Jason. So it does make sense why people would put the shark on this list. And it does scare a lot of people. I'm the weird one. It does scare some normal people. It was just interesting to me, and so I figured I would include it in this. it was just very interesting to me that a lot of people had included the shark on their list, so here we are. Next up we have Alien from Alien, or, Aliens, whatever. The first one was 1979. So this is a great sci-fi horror villain, and I suppose you go from, Alien in the first film, or like the Queen in the second one, all that jazz. I know I saw both movies referenced for sci-fi horror characters on a lot of these lists, so we're just going to kind of merge them together as a series. This is some that really creep people out, okay? The idea of life outside our planet is one thing, but then what if they're evil and they're villainous and they jump out of your friggin' chest and for sure creepy and even scary in some parts, I would say. These aliens definitely deserved a spot on this list because it's creepy. It's creepy sci-fi. It's not like, a galaxy far, far away or Star Trek or anything. It's like a creepy alien jumping out of your friggin' chest. Next up, we have Regan from The Exorcist, which came out in 1973. So I have only seen this movie one time, but I do remember Linda Blair's performance really well. In a way, you could say this movie was a bit ahead of its time. I mean, how many exorcism movies today try and capture what this movie did? It was brutal and creepy. The demon in Regan is really fucked up, and it's like you feel bad for the kid, but the demon can screw off. It's so difficult. So Regan isn't really the villain, she's possessed, so the real villain of it is the demon. But this movie and this character have some real notable parts that are still talked about today for the horror genre. The vomit scene, the head spinning around, right? And dude, this little girl gets so creepy. Even, some people talk about if the makeup's still good. I don't even care if it's like 70s makeup. It's creepy to see this child look like this. Some people compare and watch it today and find it to be funnier than a horror movie, you could say, but it scared the shit out of a lot of people in 1973. So I think the fact that this innocent girl is being tortured throughout this whole film makes this villain even more messed up and has this spot on a villain list. Alright, then we have The Thing from The Thing 1982. So I actually only recently watched this movie and I really enjoyed it. This is a great villain for a completely different reason. The villain changes. This creature or alien or monster, it changes and it shifts its appearance. So really, it starts off as a dog and then merges and changes its shape. That takes a totally different take on a horror movie, or say, running from a horror movie villain. That would make it much scarier in my opinion. Who do you trust when you basically don't know who's been infected? I think it's a fantastic idea, and it's pulled off perfectly. I think that the blood test scene is probably my favorite in this movie, where they are trying to figure out where the fuck the Thing is among their co-workers. So, long story short, I think the Thing is a fantastic villain. It is not a straightforward villain. Things are kind of left up in the air or a bit of mystery, but it is still scary and it makes for a great horror film. I guess they came out with a prequel to this in 2011, but I have not seen it. I would like to see it at some point just to see kind of what they did. Next, we have Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. So I'm not a huge Leatherface fan for a couple reasons. One, it grosses me out. Two, I've only seen bits and pieces of these really. I've only seen the 2003 remake all the way through, as well as some random sequels, but even though I am not a huge Leatherface fan, I still think he's a great villain, and here's why. This whole story, the backstory, his whole thing, his family's whole involvement in this is terrifying. This story is what scares me and makes me not want to go on road trips or travel for fear of running into a fucked up family like this. So I think he deserves a spot on this top villain list for sure. Even if he's not a favorite of mine, him and his family are some great villains, and they're creepy, and they're gross, and they're scary, and I should probably watch the original movie. Then we have Damien from The Omen, 1976. There are a lot of 70s movies on this list. So, little kids in these type of movies are always creepy to me, okay? Maybe this is why I don't want children. And Damien is no exception, okay? I just saw this movie actually for the first time probably last year, and it is scary for the time, like, you know, a 70s horror movie. I feel like it, or Damien himself, is going to be more scary if you are very religious because of what this story is, because of what the kid's backstory is, and so on. I'm not going to say he is my go-to villain or the top of my list, but I do understand why people place him on this list, or why it was scary in 1976. Next up, we have Ghostface from Scream 1996. So Ghostface in any of the films is, to me, more comical than scary, because Ghostface falls over, he makes mistakes. There are of course creepy moments and brutal parts to Ghostface and the Scream movies, but I don't find this villain overly terrifying. Not to place anything negative on Scream, because the Scream series is actually one of my favorites. It is probably my favorite slasher film, like, that's a fact. And even though Ghostface isn't overly scary to me, he is still one of my favorite villains because of the more real take on him. You know, he doesn't have like super strength or superpowers. Like I said, he falls down the stairs or he trips over the couch. No matter who is under the mask through all of the movies, I love the story, the connection to each person, whoever is wearing the ghost face mask at that point. So he definitely deserves a spot on this list. Then we have Chucky from Child's Play 1988. So, funny story. Every time I think of Chucky, I think of that meme that's all around the internet with the little kid dressed up as Chucky, and it says, you know, "Do not dress your kid up like this. I will drop kick them off my porch." So funny. So funny. Oh my gosh. So I have actually only seen one of these movies and never the original. The only one I've seen is The Bride of Chucky. I don't even know why. So, I mean, I hate dolls. So that stems from my grandmother's crazy doll room from when I was a child. But so of course I'm going to think Chucky is creepy. It's a creepy doll, right? But because I haven't seen a lot of these movies, I couldn't really tell you a lot of his backstory. I do find him creepy, but not overly terrifying. I actually find him to be rather funny as well, at least in Bride of Chucky. He's pretty comical. But at the same time, some of the others, I could see why he's on this list. And maybe he's more scary in the ones I haven't seen. Maybe I do need to see the original Child's Play to get the full scare factor of Chucky. And our last one on this list is Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs, 1986. So I have also only seen this movie one time, and Anthony Hopkins is a bit freaky. A tad loony, if you will. I'm a fan, but ooh, he's a bit creepy in this movie. But this movie was actually totally different from what I expected it to be when I sat down to watch it. Still very interesting and good. I think this is another character that people think of when they think to horror characters. Hannibal Lecter. A lot of people go to him. Definitely one of those mental thrillers that kind of has, you know, the creepy thoughts or additions to the movie plus the character. It's just a very interesting film. And I could understand why Hannibal Lecter is on a lot of people's horror villain list. So just some honorable mentions that I thought I would include. Like, they weren't necessarily on some of these lists that I read, but, you know, just some good ones that maybe I thought for horror movie villains. We'll see. Esther from The Orphan. There's a terrifying child for you. Carrie. I saw Carrie on some of these, but, you know, she was on some of these lists, but I'm like, why am I weird? I don't consider her a villain. I'm sorry, not sorry. Don't be a bully, assholes, and then you'll be fine. I also kind of thought of Annie from Misery, because she's crazy. But I mean, technically it's not considered a horror movie. It is a Stephen King book, but a lot of people consider it to be more of a thriller. So I guess that's maybe why she's not a horror villain. But I don't know, she's pretty horrifying. The ankle scene, ah! And I also thought to Gage from Pet Sematary, but the only reason I thought of that today is because I happened to be talking about that movie at work. So those were some of my thoughts on some of the top villains according to the internet. So for my lovely guest speakers, I asked you guys, my listeners, if anyone was interested in sharing their opinion on this topic. So I asked them a few questions. Who is your favorite horror movie villain? Have they always been your favorite? What do you love about that villain? Does this villain scare you? So to kick this off, I thought that I would answer these myself, and then we will go into the lovely guest speakers. So, who is your favorite horror movie villain? So currently, I'm going to say it is Michael Myers. Have they always been your favorite? Yes and no. My favorites change all the time. I've always liked Michael and thought that he was a fantastic villain. But at the same time, I've appreciated other villains as well, like Ghostface or Norman Bates and so on. I've appreciated the other villains, so my favorite has switched over the years. What do you love about this villain? So with Michael, there is an interesting character under the mask. I mean, he became a killer as a child, and when he returns home in the first movie, there isn't really a rhyme or reason to the killings, which makes it scarier. Why is he killing these people? Which is, this is a little odd for me because usually I'm that person that loves a motive or a backstory to why things are happening. But his actions and, some would say his evilness make him way creepier. And he is also just, creepy without trying. Shots of him in the back or just staring ahead. There's some scary parts that don't have to be a huge jump scare to give you like goosebumps. Just to see him standing back in a distance looking at the characters is creepy. I mean, even his doctor who had worked with him for years had zero faith in his humanity. Does this villain scare you? He is definitely scary, and like I said, those background shots are the creepy ones, I think. It doesn't have to be an in-your-face jump scare that modern horror movies rely on so much. I think back to the first Halloween and just seeing him standing on the sidewalk far back behind Laurie, or seeing him in her yard between the laundry. Those little parts that don't have to be over-the-top scary, but they still give you the creeps. Alright, so now I'm going to play back our guest speakers' thoughts and opinions. So I'll be listening to these fully for the first time right now. I only played enough of them to make sure that the audio was okay. Besides that, I am not sure who my guests have picked as their villain. So let's see which favorite villains my lovely guests have picked. First up, we are going to hear from Sargemus Prime 88.
Okay, so my favorite horror movie villain would be The Thing from the John Carpenter film of the same name. It has only been a favorite of mine for the last 10 years or so, because that was around the time I first saw the film, and what I truly like and or what scares me about it is the whole assimilation and infiltration aspect. It's that, with your average slasher movie villain like Michael Myers or Jason, you can see them coming down the street at you, and they, they're, coming to get you. But with The Thing, it can kill and then replace someone who you know very well, friends or family, and who you've known for years, and they can imitate them perfectly so that they can come up right next to you. You could be standing right next to someone you think you've known for 10 years, and bam, next thing you know, they got you. But the other thing that really scares me is the transformation aspect, where they, when outed or when discovered, how they mutate into these, for lack of a better term, eldritch abominations, where they just become distorted, warped, and the stuff that will really give you nightmares. Body parts coming off and taking on weird shapes of their own and whatnot, and teeth in places where there shouldn't be. And a lot of times it'll just be doing it in self-defense, which, doesn't make it okay, but is still pretty creepy. So yeah, it's the whole, it could be anyone in the room thing, and the uncertainty is what really makes it scary. And I'm not a fan of gore in horror movies per se, but this is an instance where I think it actually works out quite well, that because it's alien and something that comes from another planet, and therefore doesn't have to adhere to a human look or feel. So, that is what truly scares me, because ultimately the fear is just the fear of the unknown, the fear that you don't know what's out there to get you, that it could be this totally benign thing 1 second, and the next thing you know, you're gone. And the added layer is also that you yourself may not be killed by the thing. You may end up being a replacement, and then you yourself are used as an image to fool and or get someone. So ultimately, yeah, it's kind of scary, and the fact that the thing you see in the film, it's good at turning people against each other or planting false clues or red herrings that, most horror movie creatures just burst through a wall and grab someone, but this thing has time to walk among the people and, sow the seeds of distrust, make them focus on one person rather than, yourself, or who is actually the imitation. I think one of the lines, to sum it up, one of the lines from the film says it best, where a character said, if I was a perfect imitation, like a complete 100%, how would you know it? And that's the scary thing. And I think that there is some allegory with real life in there that, the real villains in the world, like really bad people, don't wear hockey masks or painted over William Shatner masks. They look just like you and me. So there is that element of it's real fear that anyone you know or looks like a quote-unquote normal person can turn on you at a second. So yeah, that's really what scares me. And I think what helps the thing is that there hasn't been, at least film-wise, numerous sequels to kind of make the concept stale. There's the original film, and then there's that 2011 prequel, which I admittedly never saw. But yeah, I think John Carpenter's The Thing is a film that's held up well, and it's because of the villain, the creature, is a big part of that. It's my favorite horror movie, and I'm thankful it didn't get bogged down in sequels like some of these other slashy movie villains did. So yeah, so now you all know what scares me. So yeah, have a great day and happy Halloween, everyone.
Fantastic! I completely and totally agree with everything that you just said. So the aspect of the thing could be anyone in the room with you is terrifying. That's so scary. And you're right, the different looks to this thing is scary, even though, it morphs and changes into a form that doesn't look human. It doesn't matter because it's not human. It doesn't have to look like a normal person as it morphs or changes in between people, and that makes it scary as well. And the idea of you being the replacement, I didn't touch on that. That's scary too. Like, I try to wonder, like, would you know that you're the replacement? Or you're just screwed at that point? Oh, that's horrifying too, to think of, like, yourself being, like, taken over. And I also love what you said about, like, the real villains in real life, and kind of, like, some deep thought to this movie, that the real villains don't wear masks, you know what I mean? Like, they look like you and me. Totally true. Completely accurate. And I also like what you said about, there hasn't really been sequels. I have heard about that prequel they made in 2011, but I have not seen it myself. But you are right with some of these villains. They just keep, like, more sequels, that it becomes dull. It ruins the horror behind it because there's just so many stupid sequels. So I completely agree with your thoughts on The Thing. I think The Thing is a fantastic horror movie villain. Alright, next up we are going to hear from Jacob Winkelman.
Hi guys, my name is Jacob Winkelman, but most people call me Generated G53. I'm here because, well, I wanted to participate in this thing from Common Escape, or Cassie, whatever you call her, with the questions. So, what is your favorite horror movie villain? I don't know if you mean what's my favorite horror movie character, favorite horror movie, antagonist or whatever. But this is tough because I'm not much of a horror movie kind of person. I'm more of a superhero Disney thing kind of person, or anime. So this is hard for me. the only one I really ever liked was Chucky, and it's really weird because Chucky was one of those characters for me that was just, I don't know if badass is the right term, but he had this vendetta that he stuck to one thing and stuck it without the whole series. So, the next question that was on here was, has this character always been your favorite? Yes and no. I don't know if you mean if he's still my favorite today or still my favorite eons. I mean, I think honestly Chucky's gone through such a huge change that nowadays it's very hard for me to be a favorite of him. So I'll say this. Until Chucky, Bride of Chucky, I was a fan of him. Because the newer ones after that were just, no. What do you love about that villain? Like I said, Chucky has a vendetta, and he has stuck to it since Chucky, since the first movie. He's had this vendetta of saying, I'm gonna take a body and I'm just gonna keep it as my own. I also love that he's at least humorous with some of, at least he's like one of the most horror characters I've seen that has a joke or like a pop culture reference in there. And he's probably the only person or a horror character I've seen that appears on other shows. He's appeared in WCW, he's appeared on MTV, he's appeared on like all these movie platforms as the animatronic, which is hilarious. But besides that, I just like his personality, I like his voice, I like that he has a plan and he sticks to it, unlike some other characters that just change their plans last minute. He's stuck in the one plan and always almost succeeds. And, you know. So the last question is, does this villain scare you? Back then, yes. Nowadays, it just looks like an animatronic that they shoved the voice in there. No. If you want a scary character for me, it has to be someone like a Jigsaw, or it has to be someone like a, I don't know, Annabelle maybe? I'm not sure. But yeah, those are my answers to your questions, Cassie. Huge fan of the podcast, huge fan of your Calm and Escape channel, and your other channel. So, hope to see myself on here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking part in this, even though you're not really a fan of horror movies. Thank you. So Chucky is your favorite, and it made me laugh that you said you were a fan until Bride of Chucky, and that's the only one I've seen. So clearly, maybe I need to go back and watch like the first Child's Play or the ones before Bride of Chucky. Maybe those were better or something. It would give me a better grasp of the character, you could say. It is funny that Chucky has made different guest appearances. I have seen some of those, or that he has become like, you know, kind of the, I don't know what, like guest of things, even though he is like this little doll animatronic character from a horror movie, but he is so popular in that way. Yeah, I'm curious if I was to go back and watch some of the earlier ones, if I would find it creepy, because I'm not a huge fan of dolls, but, or if I needed to see it when I was younger to get the creepy aspect of it, because I just find him kind of more comical, as he, you know, does his crazy stuff. But I could definitely see what you mean with, like, you know, Jigsaw or Annabelle being scarier than Chucky, who's gonna, like, you know, make a joke as he kills you or something like that. Alright, so next up we are going to hear from Emma, or Owlmoony.
Hi Cassie. I'm going to answer some questions about horror movie villains. So the first question is, who is your favourite horror movie villain? Two characters came into my mind. I'm going to talk about both if that's okay. I'll keep it short and sweet though. So the first character that came into my head was Ghostface from the Scream franchise. I've just always loved Ghostface. I was 10 or 11 when I watched the first Scream film. I actually watched Scream 2 before any of the others. But anyway, the point is I've been a fan for a very long time. Over 15 years, just over. So, I've just always loved Ghostface. I love the backstory behind who Ghostface is, you know, the big reveal in every film. Because they all have their own motive and personality. I love the use of trivia, you know, the classic, what's your favourite scary movie line. I like just the way, the first reveal that there were two ghost faces when I watched it for the first time. I really liked that. And I also love the mask. I mean, you can't deny the mask is a little bit creepy. I remember the scene in Scream 2 where the cop car crashes and Sydney has to climb over a knocked out ghost face in the driver's seat. I can picture it in my head. I can picture the shot of looking at the mask and hearing the breathing and the music and just not knowing who's underneath there. It's a little bit creepy, I think. So that is the reason why the character has always been my favourite. I've just answered 2 questions there. And yeah, like I said, I just really love the story behind the character, not just the character itself. What do you love about that villain? Again, I just love his mannerisms, or he or she, sorry, their mannerisms. I like their backstory, the reason why they're doing this, and also their interactions with the victims, the phone calls. That makes it all the more interesting. The last question, does this villain scare you? Actually, no. It did perhaps the first time I watched it when I was a young kid. But it takes a lot to scare me when it comes to horror movies. Like, I've got a strong stomach when it comes to horror movies. I can watch them and not be scared. It is a little creepy though. So that is Ghostface. And I have a second character, more recent, who I'd like to talk about, and that is Pennywise from It. Also a favourite villain of mine. In fact, Pennywise came into my head pretty much straight away when I saw the questions. So number 2, has that character always been your favourite? It has since I watched the film, but here's the thing, I saw the remake obviously when it came out in cinemas last year. That was the first It film I watched. I watched the Tim Curry version after I saw the remake, and that's only because it was on TV over here on a really obscure channel. So when I saw the remake of it, I loved it instantly. I wasn't too sure on what the story was, but I really, really loved it. And I loved Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise. I loved his facial expressions, his mannerisms, that creepy ass smile he does. And I loved how he talks. You know, he talks like a clown. It's just so creepy, and I really, really loved it. I love being creeped out. It's like, it's a weird feeling, but I do honestly like it. I think that's why people watch horror movies, because they like that feeling. And Pennywise instantly just gave me that creeped out feeling. And it wasn't just the clown either. I mean, he was that weird painting, that creepy zombie dude. But it was, I mean, when people think of Pennywise, they probably think of the clown. And it is the clown I love. So what do you love about that villain? I've just answered that. I love everything. The speech, the facial expressions, just the actor. He did a fantastic job. Even the Tim Curry version, I mean, unpopular opinion maybe, but I prefer the remake to the Tim Curry version. And I think the only reason for that is because I saw it first. But Tim Curry also did a great job. Just so creepy. And that first scene with Georgie and the paper boat, oh, classic. Does this villain scare you? Again, I wouldn't say scared me, but it really did creep me out. And that's what I really love about these horror movie villains. I think I should also give an honorary mention to Freddy Krueger from Nightmare on Elm Street. Creepy. Halloween, Michael Myers from Halloween, and I say that because I saw the remake in the cinema a few days ago, and it was a brilliant film. So creepy how someone can be that just completely psychopathic, no remorse, just the guy killing people for no reason. Hella creepy. And last but not least is a character that actually does scare me a little bit, and that is Annie Wilkes from Misery. Now, I've not watched this film in a few years, purely because it creeps me out. Because Annie Wilkes is not a typical villain. You know, you don't think, you don't see a picture of her and think, oh, she's a villain. It's just as the movie goes on that you start to get this uneasy feeling, and then some things happen and you're like, oh damn, older. So, honorary mention. In fact, I noticed Misery's back on Netflix. I might have to give it a watch this Halloween. But we'll see. It does creep me out though. I hope that's okay. Thank you for sending me the questions, and I can't wait to listen to the podcast. Thank you. Bye bye.
Alright, I think you might be like my horror movie watcher doppelganger. You sound so much like me. Like your opinions, some of the things you said, oh my gosh, I agree with you so much. You were totally my horror movie doppelganger. Oh my gosh. So, Ghostface, yes. Love it. The backstory, totally agree. Love it so much. And I do love the different trivia or what's your favorite scary movie parts tied in to Ghostface. Now, that part in Scream 2 where she had to crawl over him, that always freaked me out. Like, my anxiety's going, my heart's pumping super fast because it's like, oh my god, is Ghostface gonna jump? Is it gonna move? Oh my gosh, so crazy. I also keep calling Ghostface a he, although it's not always a he. Sometimes it's a she. But yes, totally agree. Same. It does take a lot to scare me as well. We are totally doppelgangers. Twinsies. Pennywise, the remake. Yes, I really enjoyed the remake. I saw the Tim Curry one first, but I think they did a fantastic job on this remake. And Bill Skarsgård has really good acting. He's so good. And the Georgie scene, oh my god, the Georgie scene is like horrendous, but so good because it had to happen. But so creepy, right? I do like your honorable mentions as well, like Freddy, Michael Myers. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to see the new movie. I want to see it so bad, right? And I'm so glad that you mentioned Annie from Misery because I put her on my honorable mentions too. I wasn't sure if people would classify her as like a horror villain, but I'm glad you mentioned her because she is creepy. I need to also watch it again. It's been several years since I watched Misery. But yes, you sound so much like me. Like your horror movies opinions, like totally I could see us binging a bunch of horror movies together. So thank you so much for sharing your opinions, hun. Alright, so next up we are going to hear from Josh or Generalrayjo.
Hey everyone, so for me, for villains, I actually chose, it's basically a tie between Pennywise, the clown from It, and Hannibal Lecter, but Pennywise just a little bit more, and he probably hasn't always been my favorite until lately. The film from last year, because they did that miniseries in 1990, and that was, it wasn't too bad, but I think the one they did last year really showed just how evil Pennywise really is as he stalks the town of Derry, Maine, and comes out every 27 years to start abducting children in a process, and kind of entice them to come closer to the sewer. That kind of thing, it definitely plays on your imagination, really plays on the fears, and Stephen King's was really good about really making folks have an irrational fear or something that wasn't even necessarily scary before they may have read something, especially his full 1986 novel on it is really has things in it that they can't even fit into the movie, but it makes it even more terrifying, and I think that's why Pennywise one of the best. But like I said, tie with Hannibal Lecter, because Hannibal is more realistic as far as some may not consider Hannibal as a horror villain. I do, because not only is he a serial killer, but he's a cannibal, and that kind of thing has happened before for real, and that's you never know who could be that kind of person. It could be your local cashier down at your grocery store or something like that. You never know who's actually capable of doing that, and that's why Hannibal is ties with me with Pennywise, because a lot of it's based off of real events that have actually happened, some of them recent. So it's definitely something you have to take into consideration regarding who you consider who's an actual horror villain. But as far as who actually scares me, I think the one that actually scares me is Pennywise. I didn't used to be afraid of clowns until I actually read the novel It, and absolutely scared of clowns. Now I'm scared to go near sewers. Even as a grown man, I would not go anywhere near a sewer, and I don't go anywhere near clowns. And it sounds irrational, but once again, like I said, Stephen King, excellent on playing on people's fears and have people have an irrational fear of something they weren't even scared of before. And so that's why probably the best as far as fictional is going to be Pennywise the Clown. And I can tell you, with the new movie coming next summer, or next fall, chapter 2 of it, it's going to, like, irrational fear is probably just going to get higher than that. But I can't wait to see it, because it's going to definitely play out a lot of people's fears, and it's going to make Pennywise even that much more scary.
Awesome. So I do think that the quality and the expression of how messed up Pennywise is, how scary it is delivered better in this remake. I don't know if it's just like quality-wise or what exactly, but they did, I think, express that a little bit better in this remake. And, you know, Stephen King is fantastic. I mean, we've mentioned several of his stories in this podcast already. He is very good at giving people the creeps. Hannibal Lecter being like a more realistic, you know, serial killer cannibal, it's totally true, right? I mean, I'm not going to look at my cashier the same now. Now you've put that in my mind. Just kidding. But you're totally right. When it's more of a realistic serial killer, that can be a little bit more terrifying, because it could be like someone that you sit next to on the bus or you walk down the street by, you know? It could be anybody, and that is definitely creepy. I do have the It book, the audio book for it that I need to listen to. I haven't started it yet, but I do have it. So I definitely want to listen through all of that before part 2 comes out. And I hate sewers. I hate sewers because of Pennywise and because of Penguin from Batman Returns. Sewers are a no-go for me. Alright guys, next up we are going to hear from Jordan.
So my favorite horror movie villain would definitely be the witch from the Blair Witch Project. Just because it's so open to interpretation what the thing you're afraid of is going to look like. Like, it's always so much worse to imagine something terrifying rather than actually seeing it. And the fact that you never see it is probably the most terrifying thing about it. I'm still afraid of it, and I haven't seen that movie since I was a little kid. I can't watch it again, but it's the only horror movie I've never been able to watch twice because it scared me so bad.
The Blair Witch. Now, I did not include that in the list. I did, however, mention her in my Witch podcast this month. So, I totally agree with you that the Blair Witch is up for interpretation, and for some people, that can make it scarier. Or the whole end of that movie is super creepy. Not that, I mean, there's parts in that movie that are very scary, especially when you put yourself in that situation. That's why that movie did so well, is because so many people thought it was real, and the way that it's filmed, it was, you know, the first really of its kind. Now there's found footage movies all over the place, but nothing touches on what they did with the Blair Witch Project. And it's definitely creepy because there's so many events happening, but you never see the villain. So it's like, it's a very interesting villain to think about when you don't really see it, but yet it is so present throughout the whole movie. I'm glad that you mentioned the Blair Witch. Alright, next up we're going to hear from John and or Dragula6613.
Hi Cassie, my name's John. Answering your movies about horror, or your questions about horror movie villains. So I had a difficult time picking just one. I had a tie between two. So my favorite horror movie villains right now are Mick Taylor from Wolf Creek and Dollface from the original Strangers. That might kind of answer your second question a little bit. They haven't always been my favorite. There's too many good ones out there to just pick one and keep it forever, so I tend to rotate a little bit. Some of the stuff I really like about the characters are the fact that they're just normal people. I always tend to like horror movie villains that are actual human beings over monsters. I will always love monster movies, but my personal favorite is when it's a normal person. I think that adds a level of scary, to me at least, because you never know, those people could be, standing behind you in the grocery store. But I love the way they play the characters, each one of them. Really love the way they play the characters. I think that Dollface in the original Strangers, she definitely seemed to be the ringleader of the three. There was a guy and another girl in that film as well. She was the one that knocked on the door and seemed to sort of initiate the whole set of events for the evening. She seemed to be very comfortable with her level of crazy, so I really like that. And again, what I really love about those characters is the fact that they're just they're a normal human being and not a monster. That usually tends to be more interesting to me, because people are definitely crazy, and that's just sort of what I like the best. So hopefully this is something that's usable for you, and thanks a lot. Happy Halloween.
I like that you said some that I'm not entirely familiar with. Wolf Creek sounds super familiar, but I know for a fact I haven't seen it. Strangers, I've seen the original, scared the shit out of me, so I wonder if the remake would do the same. A lot of us are saying kind of similar things with like the real life, either serial killers or just like the real life humans, can be scarier or creepier than, like, say, the monsters, because it could be anybody in our day-to-day life. I kind of touched on that, like, with Norman Bates. He's just, like, a regular guy that is crazy killer. He doesn't have supernatural powers, he's not a monster, anything like that. So a lot of us are, like, kind of touching on those points, and I think that's super true when you think about those specific movies where it is just a regular person. It makes it that much creepier. But yes, I'm definitely going to check out Wolf Creek. I'm not familiar with that, but I want to see as many horror movies as I can, so I'm taking it as a movie suggestion. Alright, and last up we are hearing from Tony Inman.
Yeah, favorite villain? I would say Pennywise the Clown. Always been my favorite. Usually it's because he doesn't straight up murder folks. He likes to make you want to kill yourself. And he preys on your fear intentionally. Instead of just the fear of being killed alone would scare you, he actually made sure you were scared. But if I was to meet Pennywise in an alley, it probably wouldn't, because you have to believe in him. So, that's about it.
True enough. Pennywise, there is that aspect to Pennywise where it is very psychological. He like screws around with you, he makes you, like, my mind immediately went to when like Beverly is in her bathroom and like the blood goes everywhere and it's just like screwing with her, and like her dad comes in and he can't see the blood but she can see it, or for Bill when he like sees his little brother, or just like all these different ways that Pennywise screws with your mind to not only like kind of like lure you closer to him, but just like make it super dark. It's very psychological. Alright everyone, thank you so much for taking part in this. Thank you to each one of you that took the time to send a clip in and be part of this podcast. I think that this one put October out with a bang for the podcast, and I do hope that it kept everyone in their Halloween spooky vibe, talking about all of the horror movie villains, of course. I do hope that all of you have a fantastic Halloween, and that you will enjoy my final Halloween video coming to my channel in the coming days. Stay safe and have a happy Halloween. And as always, thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you guys in the next Chit Chat with Cass.